The hall was bright and full of noise. Soft music played in the background, glasses clinked, and people laughed as if the night belonged only to them. It was one of those places where everything looked expensive. The floor shined like a mirror, the lights were warm and golden, and a large piano sat proudly near the center of the room. It was polished and perfect, the kind of piano most people only saw in pictures. Guests arrived in fine clothes. Their voices were confident, their steps firm. They knew they belonged there. This was their world. No one worried about saying the wrong thing or standing in the wrong place. Everyone felt important near the entrance. The door opened again, but this time no one paid attention. A young girl stepped inside quietly. She paused for a moment, holding the door behind her as it closed. Her clothes were simple and a little worn. Her shoes were clean but old. She did not look lost, but she did look careful. Like someone who had learned to take up as little space as possible, she stood there, unsure where to go, letting the crowd pass by her. People brushed past without noticing. A few eyes landed on her and quickly looked away. Some faces showed confusion, others quiet judgment. She was clearly not one of them. The girl took a slow breath and moved forward. Her eyes wandered around the room, not at the people, but at the space itself. Then her gaze stopped. The piano. It stood under a soft light, almost glowing. The girl's steps slowed. Something in her face changed. Her shoulders relaxed, and for the first time since she entered, she looked calm. It was as if the noise around her faded away. She remembered another time, another place. A small room, cold walls, a piano that was old and out of tune. Long nights where her fingers hurt, but she kept playing anyway. Music had once been the only thing that made life feel less heavy. When words failed her, the keys understood, but that life felt far away now. She had not touched a piano in a long time. Work, survival, and loss had pushed music into the background. Dreams did not pay bills. Dreams did not keep the lights on. Slowly, she had learned to lock that part of herself away, until now. Her feet carried her closer without her fully realizing it. She stopped a few steps from the piano. People nearby noticed her hesitation. A woman glanced at her shoes, then at her dress, and leaned toward her friend with a small laugh. A man frowned, clearly annoyed that someone like her was standing near something so valuable. The girl did not look at them. Her eyes were fixed on the keys. She lifted her hand slightly, then lowered it again. Doubt crept in. She told herself it was a bad idea. She did not belong here. She should leave before she embarrassed herself. But her fingers tingled. The urge was strong, almost painful. She stepped closer. A few whispers began. What is she doing? Does she think she can play? Someone should stop her. The girl heard some of it, but not all. Her heart beat faster. She placed one hand gently on the edge of the piano, as if asking permission. The surface was smooth and cool. She swallowed. This was not about the people. This was about her. Slowly, carefully, she reached out and touched one key. The sound was soft, barely noticeable, but it was enough. Laughter broke out from a few guests. Not loud, but sharp. Mocking smiles spread across faces. Someone shook their head. Another rolled their eyes. A staff member noticed the scene and started walking toward her with concern written all over his face. The girl froze. She pulled her hand back quickly, as if she had touched fire. Her cheeks burned. For a moment, she thought about running, leaving the hall and never looking back. But something inside her refused. She looked down at her hands. They were not elegant. They showed signs of work and struggle. Still, they were the same hands that once created beauty. She took a small step back, then forward again. The staff member reached her and spoke in a low voice, clearly trying to stay polite. He told her the piano was not for guests, that performances were scheduled, that she needed to step away. She nodded, understanding. She did not argue. But before leaving, she spoke. Her voice was quiet but steady. She asked for just 1 minute, one chance. The staff member hesitated. He looked around at the guests, then back at her. He could already feel their eyes on him, waiting to see what he would do. He did not believe she could play, but something about her calm expression made him pause. Round them, the whispers grew louder. This will be embarrassing. Why is she even here? The girl stood still, her hands folded in front of her. She did not beg. She did not explain her past or her pain. She simply waited. Inside, fear and hope fought each other. If she failed, this would be the moment she regretted forever. If she succeeded, she did not even allow herself to finish that thought. The staff member finally sighed. He stepped aside slightly, not fully agreeing, but not stopping her either. A small path opened between her and the piano. The girl took one last breath and walked forward. Every step felt heavy. Every eye felt sharp. She sat down slowly, adjusting the bench. Her hands hovered above the keys, shaking just a little. The noise in the hall began to fade, not because people were silent, but because she stopped listening. She closed her eyes. In that moment, she was no longer the girl in worn clothes. She was not the one being judged. She was simply someone who loved music. Her fingers lowered, and the first real note was about to be played. The room felt different now. Even before a single real note was played, the air had changed. People were no longer walking around freely. Some had stopped mid-step. Others turned their bodies slightly toward the piano, curious despite themselves. The girl sat still for a moment longer than expected. Her hands rested above the keys, not touching them yet. A few guests exchanged looks, already convinced this would be a short and awkward moment. Someone near the back chuckled softly. "Is she scared now?" Another voice whispered, "She doesn't even know where to start." The girl heard none of it. Her eyes were closed, and her breathing was slow. She was not trying to impress anyone. She was trying to remember who she used to be. She pictured the small room from her past again. The cracked walls, the weak light, the sound of rain tapping against the window while she practiced late into the night. She remembered how music once carried her through days when everything else felt broken. Her fingers finally lowered. The first notes were gentle and careful. They were almost too soft. A few people frowned. Some smiled in a way that said they were waiting for her to fail. One guest shook his head and took a sip of his drink, already bored. The melody sounded simple at first. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that demanded attention. And that was when the laughter returned. A quiet laugh here. A whispered joke there. Someone murmured that this was a waste of time. Another guest glanced at their watch. The girl's shoulders stiffened for just a second. She felt it. The doubt. The fear that she had made a mistake. Her fingers nearly stopped. But then she remembered something her old teacher once said. "Do not play for ears. Play for the heart." She pressed on. The next notes came with more confidence. The rhythm changed slightly. The sound grew warmer, deeper. Her hands began to move more freely, as if they had been waiting for permission all along. The laughter faded, not suddenly, but slowly. One woman tilted her head, confused by the change in the music. A man who had been talking loudly fell silent without realizing it. A server passing by stopped walking and stood still, tray in hand. The girl leaned into the piano, her back straight, her face calm. The music now carried emotion. It was no longer just sound. It was memory. It was pain. It was hope. Each note felt honest. The room grew quieter. People began to notice details they had missed before. The way her fingers moved with purpose. The control in her hands. The way the melody rose and fell naturally, like breathing. Someone whispered, "She's actually good." Another replied softly, "No, she's more than good." The girl opened her eyes briefly and looked down at the keys. She was no longer shaking. The piano felt familiar again, like an old friend she had not seen in years. She let the music grow. The melody became stronger, more complex. Her left hand carried weight and depth, while her right hand danced lightly above it. The sound filled the hall, reaching corners that had been loud and careless just moments ago. Now, no one was laughing. The people who had mocked her earlier shifted uncomfortably. Some crossed their arms. Others stared at the floor, suddenly unsure of themselves. A man near the front swallowed hard. He had been one of the first to smirk. Now his eyes were fixed on the girl, wide and unblinking. The music pulled at something inside him. Inside many of them. It reminded them of things they had forgotten, dreams they once had, feelings they had buried under busy lives and proud faces. The girl played on. She did not rush. She allowed the pauses to speak as loudly as the notes themselves. The silence between sounds held meaning. A woman in the crowd felt tears rise to her eyes and did not understand why. She had never cared much for piano music before. But this felt different. This felt real. The staff member who had tried to stop the girl earlier stood frozen near the edge of the room. He felt a tightness in his chest, guilt mixed with awe. He realized how close he had come to silencing something beautiful. The melody shifted again. Now it carried strength. Not loud strength, but quiet courage. The kind built over years of struggle. The kind that survives even when everything else is taken away. The girl's fingers moved faster, then slower, guiding the room through her story without a single word. People leaned in. Some forgot to breathe. The piano was no longer just an object in a rich hall. It had become a voice The girl's voice. She remembered the nights she went to sleep hungry, the days she chose work over practice, the times she walked past music shops and looked away because it hurt too much to look inside. All of that poured into the keys. The final section began softly again, like a whisper. It felt fragile, as if the music itself could break. The girl's face showed emotion now. Not sadness exactly, but release. The hall was completely silent. No whispers, no movement. Only the sound of the piano. The girl reached the last note and let it linger. Her fingers rested on the keys, holding the sound for just a heartbeat longer. Then she lifted her hands. The note faded. For a moment, nothing happened. No clapping, no words. Just silence, the kind of silence that speaks louder than noise. The girl sat still, unsure what it meant. Her heart pounded. Had she done enough? Had they truly listened? She slowly stood up from the bench, and that was when someone in the crowd finally exhaled. The spell was broken, but what came next would change everything. The silence did not end right away. It stretched longer than the girl expected. Her hands trembled slightly at her sides as she stood near the piano, unsure whether she should sit back down or quietly walk away. Her heart was beating fast, not with pride, but with fear. Silence could mean many things. She looked down at the floor, already preparing herself for disappointment. Then one person began to clap. It was slow at first, careful, almost unsure. A second pair of hands joined, then another. The sound spread across the hall like a wave that could no longer be stopped. In moments, the room filled with applause. Not polite applause, not forced smiles. This was real, strong, loud. The girl lifted her head, startled. Her eyes widened as she took in the sight. People were standing now. Some clapped above their heads. Others nodded with deep respect. A few wiped their eyes, pretending they had something in them. She had not expected this. She had hoped, maybe, that they would not laugh. That was all. The applause grew louder. The girl felt her throat tighten. She pressed her lips together, holding back emotion. She bowed her head slightly, not knowing what else to do. She was not used to being seen. The staff member who had tried to stop her earlier stepped forward. His face had changed completely. Gone was the concern and doubt. In its place was shock mixed with admiration. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, leaning closer so only she could hear. "I didn't know." She nodded gently. She did not need his apology. Not now. As the clapping slowly faded, voices returned to the room. But they were different now, softer, respectful. People began to whisper again, but not with mockery. Where did she learn to play like that? That was beautiful. I've never heard anything like it. The girl stepped away from the piano, giving space as if it no longer belonged to her. She felt suddenly tired, like she had poured everything inside her into those keys. She thought it was over. She was wrong. A well-dressed man approached her, holding his glass forgotten at his side. His voice was calm, but there was urgency beneath it. "Excuse me," he said. "May I ask you something?" She hesitated, then nodded. Double quotes. "Where did you study music?" The question caught her off guard. She had not heard those words in years. Study, music. They felt like memories from another lifetime. "I didn't finish," she replied honestly. "I learned a long time ago." The man frowned slightly, not in doubt, but in thought. "Your technique," he said. "It's trained, very trained." Before she could answer, another person joined them. Then another. Soon, a small group formed around her. Each question pulled her further into the spotlight. She felt exposed. A woman with kind eyes spoke gently. "You played with so much feeling," she said. It sounded like a story. The girl gave a small smile. "It was," she said. That was all she could manage. The crowd slowly parted as someone else stepped forward. An older man, his posture straight despite his age, studied her carefully. His eyes narrowed, not with suspicion, but recognition. He had been standing near the back of the hall the entire time. "You learned properly," he said at last. "Not just notes, discipline, control." The girl felt a strange chill. "I once knew someone who played the same way," the man continued. "Many years ago." Her breath caught. She looked at him now, really looked at him, and something stirred deep inside her memory. His voice, his stance, the way he held his hands. Her heart skipped. "You," she began, then stopped. She was not sure. She did not want to be wrong. The man smiled faintly. "You were younger then," he said. "Very stubborn, very gifted." The room seemed to spin. It had been so long since anyone had spoken to her like that. Like she mattered. Like her talent was real. "I had to stop," she said quietly, almost ashamed. "Life got in the way." The man nodded slowly. Life often does. There was no judgment in his voice. The guests watched the exchange in silence, sensing that something important was unfolding. This was no longer just about a surprising performance. This was about a past that refused to stay buried. The girl took a step back, suddenly overwhelmed. She had not planned for this. She had not come here to explain herself or reopen old wounds. "I should go," she said softly. Before anyone could stop her, she turned and began walking toward the exit. The room parted for her this time. No one laughed. No one whispered. They watched her go with respect outside. The night air was cool. She stepped onto the quiet street and let out a shaky breath she had been holding for far too long. Her legs felt weak, and she leaned against the wall for support. She told herself she had done the right thing. She had honored that part of herself. That was enough. Or so she thought. The door behind her opened. Again, footsteps approached. She straightened, ready to apologize if needed, ready to disappear if asked. But the voice that called her name stopped her cold. Not her current name. The name she had not heard in years. The name tied to her music. She turned slowly. The older man stood there, the soft light from inside falling across his face. "You never stopped being a musician," he said gently. "You only stopped playing." Her eyes filled with tears. She had carried that truth silently for so long. Now, someone else had spoken it out loud. The past had found her again, and it was not done with her yet. She stood there in the cool night air, unable to speak for a moment. The older man's words stayed with her, heavy and gentle at the same time. She had spent years telling herself she was no longer a musician. Saying it out loud had made survival easier. Hearing someone challenge that truth shook her deeply. "I don't play anymore," she said at last, her voice low. "Tonight was just something I needed to do." The man studied her face. He did not argue. He did not push. He simply nodded, as if he understood more than she was saying. "May I walk with you?" he asked. She hesitated, then nodded. They moved a few steps away from the entrance, finding a quieter spot under a dim streetlight. Inside the hall, the event slowly returned to life, but it sounded distant now, like it belonged to another world. "You disappeared," the man said gently, "after your last performance. No one knew where you went." She let out a slow breath. "I didn't plan to disappear. Things just happened." She told him pieces of the truth. Not everything, just enough. About the sickness in her family, about needing money, about choosing work over practice, about telling herself it was temporary, even as years passed. The man listened without interrupting. When she finished, he nodded again. "You survived," he said simply. "That matters." She looked away, blinking back tears. "Surviving wasn't the hard part," she replied. "Letting go was." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You never really let go. I could hear it in your playing." Before she could respond, the door opened once more. This time, several people stepped outside. The well-dressed man from earlier was among them, along with a woman and two others who looked important in their own quiet ways. They stopped a few steps away, clearly unsure whether they were interrupting something personal. "We don't want to pressure you," the woman said carefully, "but we were hoping to speak with you." The girl felt her stomach tighten. This was becoming too much. "I'm not looking for attention," she said quickly. "I didn't come here for that." "We know," the man replied. "That's why we're here." They explained that they worked with music programs, events, and private sponsors. People who supported talent that had been overlooked. People who believed art should not belong only to those born into comfort. As they spoke, the girl felt torn. Part of her wanted to run. Part of her wanted to listen. The older man watched her closely. "You don't have to decide anything tonight," he said. "Just hear them out." They offered her a card. Just one. No promises. No contracts. Just a door, slightly open. She took it with shaking fingers. "Thank you," she said quietly. The group nodded and stepped back, giving her space again. One by one, they returned inside. The older man lingered. "I won't push you," he said. "But don't disappear again." She managed a small smile. "I'll try." When he finally left, she stood alone under the streetlight for a long time. The city hummed around her. Cars passed. Voices drifted by. Life moved on, as it always did. She looked down at the card in her hand. For years, her world had been small, safe in its own way, predictable. Tonight had cracked it open. She went home late. Her room was quiet and modest. She sat on the edge of her bed, card still in her hand, and stared at the wall. Sleep did not come easily. Her mind replayed the music, the faces, the applause. In the days that followed, nothing seemed to change on the surface. She returned to work. She kept her head down. Life demanded the same things it always had. But inside, something was different. She found herself listening more closely to sounds around her. The rhythm of footsteps, the hum of machines, the beat of rain against metal roofs. Music was everywhere. Once she allowed herself to hear it, one evening, she stopped in front of a small music shop. She had passed it many times before without looking in. This time, she paused. The window displayed instruments worn with age, honest instruments. She stared at an old keyboard near the back. Her heart raced. She walked inside. The shop owner barely looked up as she entered. She moved slowly, afraid she might change her mind. When she reached the keyboard, she rested her fingers lightly on it. She did not play, not yet, but she stayed there for a long time. A week later, she called the number on the card. Her voice shook as she introduced herself. She half expected the person on the other end to sound bored or distracted. Instead, they sounded relieved. They invited her to a small rehearsal space. No audience, no pressure, just a piano. When she arrived, the room was simple. Plain walls, a bench, a piano that had seen better days. It was perfect. She sat down slowly, just like she had in the hall. This time, no one watched her with judgment. No one laughed. No one whispered. She played. At first, it was rough. Her fingers stumbled. Years away had left their mark. Frustration rose quickly. She nearly stopped. Then she remembered why she started. She kept going. The people in the room listened quietly. They did not clap. They did not interrupt. When she finished, one of them smiled. "You still have it," they said. She laughed softly, a sound she had not made in a long time. "I'm not sure," she replied, "but I want to try." That was enough. She did not become famous overnight. Nothing magical happened. There were no sudden headlines. There was only work, practice after long days, sore fingers, doubt, hope, small progress, and through it all, music returned to her life. Slowly and honestly, she still remembered the night she was mocked for touching the piano. But now, she remembered something else. The moment she chose not to walk away from who she truly was. The final step was still ahead, and it would require more courage than she had ever known. The weeks passed quietly, but they were not empty. Each day carried weight now, not the heavy kind that pressed her down, but the kind that reminded her something meaningful was growing. She woke up earlier than before. She practiced when her hands were tired. She listened to her own playing with patience instead of anger. There were days she doubted herself, days when the notes felt stiff and wrong. On those days, she remembered the hall, the silence, the moment people stopped laughing. That memory pushed her forward. The small rehearsal space became familiar. The smell of old wood, the slight creak of the bench. The piano was not perfect, but neither was she. Somehow, that made it easier. The people who supported her never rushed her. They did not promise fame or success. They only offered guidance, time, and belief. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to accept help. One afternoon, after a long practice session, she was asked a simple question. "Would you be willing to perform again?" Her chest tightened. Perform. The word brought fear and excitement at the same time. She did not answer right away. She went home and sat alone in her room, thinking late into the night. She thought about the girl who once dreamed without limits. She thought about the woman who learned to survive by letting go. And she thought about who she was becoming now. The next day, she said yes. The event was nothing like the grand hall from before. It was smaller, warmer. The audience was modest, but attentive. People were there to listen, not to judge. Still, as she sat at the piano, her hands shook. Fear had not disappeared. She reminded herself that courage was not the absence of fear. It was choosing to play anyway. When her fingers touched the keys, the room settled. She played slowly at first, letting the sound guide her. The music flowed more freely now, shaped by both her past and her present. She felt grounded. When she finished, the applause was gentle but sincere. She stood up, breathing deeply, and smiled. Not because she impressed them, but because she stayed true to herself. That performance led to another, and another. Nothing came easily. She balanced work, practice, and rest carefully. She learned to protect her energy. She learned that her worth was not measured by applause alone. Over time, her story began to spread quietly, not as a miracle, not as a headline, but as a reminder. People spoke about the girl who was mocked for touching a piano and chose not to walk away. One evening, she was invited back to the same hall where everything had begun. She stood at the entrance again, dressed simply, but with confidence she did not have before. The room looked the same, the lights, the piano, but she was not the same. As she walked toward the piano, no one laughed, no one whispered. They recognized her now. She sat down and placed her hands on the keys. This time, there was no fear. She played with clarity and strength. Every note carried intention. The room listened, fully present. When the final note faded, the applause rose immediately. She stood and bowed her head, not in gratitude for praise, but in respect for the journey that brought her there. Later that night, as the hall emptied, she remained behind for a moment. She approached the piano once more and rested her hand on it. "Thank you," she whispered. Not to the instrument alone, but to the struggle. To the silence. To the moment she almost walked away. She left the hall quietly, just as she had entered the first time. But now, she carried something different. Not validation, not revenge. Just peace, and the quiet knowledge that she never needed permission to be who she was meant to be.